Hello, I'm going to do some reading about Thomas Sowell. I thought it was so well, but I think you actually say Soul. I have just been watching a YouTube video. The director, I think you'd call him director, his name was Jason Riley, and it was about Thomas Sowell's life. I've been subjected to him on other things. Possibly you'd call it to be conservatism. Anyway, let's read this. Thomas Sowell, born June the 30th, 1930, is an American economist, social theorist, and senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. Thomas Sowell. Sowell in 1964, born June the 30th, 1930, age 90, Gastonia, North Carolina, US. Spouses. Alma Jean Parr, died 1964, divorced 1975. Mary Ash, married 1981. Children 2. Institutions: Cornell University, Brandeis University, Urban Institute, University of California, Los Angeles, Hoover Institution at Stanford University. Field: welfare economics, education, politics, history, race relations, child development. I'm just very interested to see what welfare economics is. Welfare economics. This article has multiple issues. Please help improve it or discuss these issues on the talk page. Welfare economics is a branch of economics that uses microeconomic techniques to evaluate well-being, welfare at the aggregate economy-wide level. Attempting to apply the principles of welfare economics gives rise to the field of public economics, the study of how government might intervene to improve social welfare. Welfare economics also provides the theoretical foundations for particular instruments of public economics, including cost-benefit analysis, while the combination of welfare economics and insights from behavioral economics has led to the creation of a new subfield, behavioral welfare economics. The field of welfare economics is associated with two fundamental theorems. The first states that given certain assumptions, competitive markets produce Pareto efficient outcomes. It captures the logic of Adam Smith's invisible hand. The second states that given further restrictions, any Pareto efficient outcome can be supported as a competitive market equilibrium. Thus, a social planner could use a social welfare function to pick the most equitable, efficient outcome, then use lump sum transfers followed by competitive trade to bring it about. Because of welfare economics' close ties to social choice theory, Arrow's impossibility theorem is sometimes listed as a third fundamental theorem. A typical methodology begins with the derivation or assumption of a social welfare function, which can then be used to rank economically feasible allocations of resources in terms of the social welfare they entail. Such functions typically include measures of economic efficiency and equity, though more recent attempts to quantify social welfare have included a broader range of measures, including economic freedom as the capability approach. Approaches to welfare economics. Main articles: social welfare function and welfare definition of economics. Cardinal utility. See also cardinal utility. The early neoclassical approach was developed by Edgeworth, Sidgwick, Marshall, and Pigou. It assumes the following. Utility is cardinal, that is, scale measurable by observational judgment. Preferences are exogenously given and stable. Additional consumption provides smaller and smaller increases in utility, diminishing marginal utility. All individuals have interpersonally commensurable utility functions, an assumption that Edgeworth voided in his Mathematical Psychics. With these assumptions, it is possible to construct a social welfare function simply by summing all the individual utility functions. Note that such a measure would still be concerned with the distribution of income, distributive efficiency, but not the distribution of final utilities. In normative terms, such authors were writing in the Benthamite tradition. Ordinal utility. See also ordinal utility. The new welfare economics approach is based on the work of Pareto, Hicks, and Kaldor. It explicitly recognises the differences between the efficiency aspect of the discipline and the distribution aspect and treats them differently. Questions of efficiency are assessed with criteria such as Pareto efficiency and the Kaldor-Hicks compensation tests, while questions of income distribution are covered in social welfare function specification. Further efficiency dispenses with cardinal measures of utility, replacing it with ordinal utility, which merely ranks commodity bundles with an indifference curve map, for example. Criteria efficiency. Situations are considered to have distributive efficiency when goods are distributed to the people who can gain the most utility from them. Pareto efficiency is a useful efficiency goal that is standard in economics. A situation is Pareto efficient only if no individual can be made better off without making someone else worse off. An example of an efficient situation would be if Smith owns an apple but would prefer to consume an orange, while Jones owns an orange but would prefer to consume an apple. Both could be made better off by trading. A Pareto efficient state of affairs can only come about if four criteria are met. The marginal rates of substitution and consumption for any two goods are identical for all consumers. We cannot reallocate goods between two consumers and make it both happier. The marginal rate of transformation and production for any two goods is identical for all producers of these two goods. We cannot reallocate production between two producers and increase total output. The marginal physical product of a factor input, e.g. labour, must be the same for all producers of a good. We cannot reduce production cost by reallocating production between two producers. I'm beginning to get bored. I'm going to go back. I don't pretend to understand a great deal at all. In fact, I understand very little. Welfare economics is a branch of economics that uses microeconomic techniques to evaluate well-being, welfare at the aggregate, economy-wide level. What is microeconomic? I feel like an AI machine, and I'm feeding myself. My brain will be consciously, subconsciously going over, putting everything together, and I have to feed it first, and then have my brain go over and mull it. Further information, history of microeconomics. Microeconomics, from Greek prefix micro meaning small plus economics, is a branch of economics that studies the behaviour of individuals and firms in making decisions regarding the allocation of scarce resources and the interactions among these individuals and firms. Microeconomics analyses the market mechanisms that enable buyers and sellers to establish relative prices among goods and services, shown as a marketplace in Delhi. One goal of microeconomics is to analyse the market mechanisms that establish relative prices among goods and services and allocate limited resources among alternative uses. Microeconomics shows conditions under which free markets lead to desirable allocations. It also analyses market failure, where markets fail to produce sufficient results. While microeconomics focuses on firms and individuals, microeconomics focuses on the sum total of economic activity, dealing with the issue of growth, inflation, and unemployment, and with national policies relating to these issues. Microeconomics also deals with the effects of economic policies such as changing taxation levels on microeconomic behaviour and thus on the aforementioned aspects of the economy. Particularly in the wake of the Lucas critique, much of modern microeconomic theories has been built upon micro foundations i.e. based upon basic assumptions about micro-level behaviour. Assumptions and definitions. Microeconomic theory typically begins with the study of a single rational and utility maximising individual. To economists, rationality means an individual possesses stable preferences that are both complete and transitive. Oh my god, they're trans. Oh. The technical assumption that preference relations are continuous is needed to ensure the existence of a utility function. Although microeconomic theory can continue without this assumption, it would make comparative statistics impossible, since there is no guarantee that the resulting utility function would be differentiable. Microeconomic theory progresses by defining a competitive budget set with a subset of the consumption set. It is at this point that economists make the technical assumption that preferences are locally non-satiated. Without the assumption of LNS, local non-satiation, there is no 100% guarantee, but there would be a rational rise in individual utility. With the necessary tools and assumptions in place, the utility maximisation problem, UMP, U for utility, M for maximisation, P for problem, is developed. With the necessary tools and assumptions in place, the utility maximisation problem, UMP, is developed. I'm getting bored now. History of microeconomics. It's dumb. History of microeconomics. Microeconomics is the study of the behaviour of individuals and small impacting organisations in making decisions on the allocation of limited resources. The modern field of microeconomics arose as an effort of neoclassical economics school of thought to put economics ideas into mathematical mode. Top row, Jevons, Walras, Marshall. Middle row, Paul Douglas, Edward Chamberlain, Paul Samuelson. Bottom row, Michael Spence, George Akerlof, Joseph Stiglitz. Oh, origins. Microeconomics descends philosophically from utilitarianism and mathematically from the work of Daniel Bernoulli. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism as a distinct ethical position only emerged in the 18th century, usually credited to Jeremy Bentham, but I think possibly I've got confused between Edmund Burke and Jeremy Bentham. But there were earlier writers such as Epicurus who presented similar theories. Bentham's An Introduction to the Principles of Morals and Legislation, 1780, begins by defining the principle of utility. 2. The principle of utility is the foundation of the present work. It will be proper, therefore, at the outset to give an explicit and determined account of what is meant by it. By the principle of utility is meant that principle which approves or disapproves of every action whatsoever, according to the tendency it appears to have to augment or diminish the happiness of the party whose interest is in question, or what is the same thing, in other words, to promote or to oppose that happiness. I say of every action whatsoever, and therefore not only of every action of a private individual, but of every measure of government. 3. By utility is meant that property in an object, whereby it tends to produce benefit, advantage, pleasure, good, or happiness. All this in the present case comes to the same thing, or what comes again to the same thing, to prevent the happening of mischief, pain, evil, or unhappiness to the party whose interest is considered. If that party be the community in general, then the happiness of the community; if a particular individual, then the happiness of that individual. 4. The interest of the community is one of the most general expressions that can occur in the phraseology of morals. No wonder that the meaning of it is often lost. When it has a meaning, it is this: the community is a fictitious body composed of the individual persons who are considered as constituting, as it were, its members. The interest of the community then is, what is it? The sum of the interests of the several members who compose it. He also defined how pleasure can be measured. 1. Pleasures then and the avoidance of pains are the ends which the legislator has in view. It behooves him, therefore, to understand their value. Pleasures and pains are the instruments he has to work with. It behooves him, therefore, to understand their force, which is again, in other words, their value. To a person considered by himself, the value of a pleasure or pain considered by itself will be greater or less according to the four following circumstances: its intensity, its duration, its certainty or uncertainty, its propinquity or remoteness. 3. There are circumstances which are to be considered in estimating a pleasure or a pain, considered each of them by itself. But when the value of any pleasure or pain is considered for the purpose of estimating the tendency of any act by which it is produced, there are two other circumstances to be taken into the account. These are its fecundity, or in the chance it has of being followed by sensations of the same kind, that is, pleasures if it be a pleasure, pains if it be a pain; its purity, or the chance it has of not being followed by sensations of the opposite kind, that is, pains if it be a pleasure, pleasures if it be a pain. These two last, however, are in strictness scarcely to be deemed properties of the pleasure or the pain itself. They are not, therefore, in strictness to be taken into account of the value of that pleasure or that pain. They are in strictness to be deemed properties only of the act or other event which by such pleasure or pain has been produced, and accordingly are only to be taken into the account of the tendency of such act or such event. A list of utilitarians also includes James Mill, Stuart Mill, and William Paley. Expected utility. Can't be bothered. I don't want to read. I'm going to do James Mill. James Mill, from Wikipedia, English Wikipedia. James Mill, born James Milne, 6th of April 1773 to the 23rd of June 1836, was a Scottish historian, economist, political theorist and philosopher. He is counted among the founders of the Ricardian School of Economics. He also wrote the monumental work The History of British India. He was the first writer to divide Indian history into three parts: Hindu, Muslim and British, a classification which has proved surpassingly influential in the field of Indian historical studies, but which is seen in recent decades as being deeply problematic. James Mill. Born James Milne, 6th of April 1773, North Waterbridge, parish of Logie Pert, Angus, Scotland. Died 23rd of June 1836, aged 63, Kensington, London, England. Alma mater, University of Edinburgh. Spouses, Harriet Burrow. Era, 19th century philosophy. Region, Western Philosophy School. Associationalism, utilitarianism, liberalism, Ricardian economics. Main interests: psychology, ethics, economics. Influences: David Hartley, Dougal Stewart, Jeremy Bentham. Influenced: John Stuart Mill. Mill was the father of John Stuart Mill, a noted philosopher of liberalism and utilitarianism and a colonial administrator at the East India Company. Biography: James Milne, later known as James Mill, was born in North Waterbridge in the parish of Logie Pert, Angus, Scotland, the son of James Milne, a shoemaker and small farmer. His mother, Isabel Fenton, of a family that had suffered from connection with the Stuart Rising, resolved that he should receive a first-rate education, and after the parish school they sent him on to the Montrose Academy, where he remained until the usual age of 17 and a half. He then entered the University of Edinburgh, where he distinguished himself as a Greek scholar. In October 1789 he was ordained as a minister of the Church of Scotland, but met with little further success. According to John Stuart Mill's autobiography, his father, though educated in the creed of Scots Presbyterianism, had by his own studies and reflections been early led to reject not only the belief in revelation, but the foundations of what is commonly called natural religion. From 1790 to 1802, while supporting himself by various tutorships, he also pursued various historical and philosophical studies. With little prospect of a career in Scotland, In 1802 he went to London in company with Sir John Stuart of Fettercairn, then Member of Parliament for Kincardineshire. He devoted himself to his literary work. From 1803 to 1806 he was editor of an ambitious periodical called The Literary Journal, which tried to give a summary view of all the leading departments of human knowledge. During this time he also edited the St. James's Chronicle, published by the same proprietor. In 1804 he wrote a pamphlet on the corn trade, arguing against a tariff or bounty on the export of grain. In 1805 he published a translation with notes and quotations, an essay on the spirit and influence of the Reformation of Luther by Charles de Villiers on the Reformation, and an attack on the alleged vices of the papal system. About the end of this year he began work on the history of British India, which was to occupy him for 12 years rather than the 3 or 4 he had expected. In that year too he married Harriet Burrough, whose mother, a widow, kept what was then known as an establishment for lunatics in Hoxton. They took a house in Pentonville, where their eldest son, John Stuart Mill, was born 1806. The back of number 19 York Street, 1848, in 1651 John Milton moved into a pretty garden house in Petty, France. He lived there until the Restoration. Later it became number 19 York Street, belonged to Jeremy Bentham, was occupied successively by James Mill and William Hazlitt, and was demolished in 1877. In 1808 he became acquainted with Jeremy Bentham, who was 25 years his senior and for many years his chief companion and ally. He adopted Bentham's principles in their entirety and determined to devote all of his energies to bringing them before the world. Between 1806 and 1818 he wrote for the Anti-Jacobin Review, the British Review and the Eclectic Review, but there is no means of tracing his contributions. In 1808 he began to write for the more prominent Edinburgh Review, to which he contributed steadily till 1813, his first known article being Money in Exchange. He also wrote on Spanish America, China, Francisco de Miranda, the East India Company, and freedom of the press. In an annual review for 1808, 2 articles of his are traced, a review of Fox's history and an article on Bentham's law reforms, probably his first published notice of Bentham. In 1811 he cooperated with William Allen, 1770 to 1843, a Quaker and chemist, in a period called The Philanthropist. He contributed largely to every issue, his principal topics being education, freedom of the press, and prison discipline, under which he expounded Bentham's Panopticon. He made powerful onslaughts on the Church in connection with the Bell and Lancaster controversy, and took a part in the discussions that led to the foundation of the University of London in 1825. In 1814 he wrote a number of articles containing an exposition of utilitarianism for the supplement of the 5th edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, the most important being those on jurisprudence, prisons, government, and law of nations. The History of British India was published in 1818 and obtained a great immediate and enduring success. It brought about a matching change in the author's fortunes, and in the year following he was appointed an official in India House in the important department of the Examiner of Indian Correspondence. He gradually rose the ranks until in 1830 he was appointed head of the office with a salary of £1,900, raised in 1836 to £2,000. His great work on economics, the elements of political economy, appeared in 1821, third and revised edition 1825.